And I understand why Denzel does a lot of the same roles because that's what people want to see him in, and they make money, right? Same thing.
Right.
Dwayne Johnson, Jason Statham. I'm sure if you and I were talking to Denzel right now, he'd probably have a lot of other things he'd say I'd like to do in terms of roles and films and whatever. But let's be honest, people want to see him in that revenge dad kind of a role, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Welcome to the most overrated, underappreciated, most viewed, underviewed podcast of all time. Welcome to the Prince of Fresh Air. I'm, of course, your host, the most charismatic man in entertainment. Please acknowledge me like you're Roman Reigns. Anyway, enough about that. It's been a little while since I had an episode, but you know what? Life is happening. Summer's going on. A lot of things going on. But you know what? We're back in action. We're back for another episode, and this one is going to be a little special because not only do I have this returning special guest, but we're going to do things a little differently in this episode. So, who am I interviewing today? Well, actually, who's interviewing me today? That's the real question now. He is a director, producer, and writer known for his women's sports drama EFC, which you can watch on Tubi and Roku channel. He's won over 30 awards, including his best feature film and won Best Director award at the 45th Palladino d'Oro International Sports Film Festival in December. He's killing it in the entertainment industry, coming all the way from Canada. Please help me introduce JAZE BORDEAUX back to the podcast.
Mm. Hey, Percy, as always, what a fantastic intro. Always
Yeah,
kill it every time, right?
I was a little rusty. I messed up a little bit, but we could skip that. We could skip that. I think it was clean. But I hope everything's going well. How's everything since the last episode? I see you doing the rounds. You're getting your due. Everybody's showing you respect, and your movie's doing very well. A lot of your cast members actually left comments on the episode. So how's life been?
We've been busy as always. I guess it's been a minute since we last connected on here and did the episode before, but it's been busy. Obviously, we're also getting ready to drop another film next year, winter next year, called Let Go. I think we talked about very briefly last time. Psychological romantic thriller was shot in 12 different European countries. It's a wonderful film. Well, we can talk about that later. But obviously, all hands on deck, getting that ready to obviously do the festival circuit first, and then go into the commercial market, right?
Right.
So we have had our hands full, and that's just one. We're also working on obviously we talked about before a film, sci-fi thriller film slate. We have another short film coming out somewhere soon. I think right after Let Go. So we are all hands on deck right now, and we are hitting the pavement, running hard, right?
Yeah.
As you have to be. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you got to stay busy, and it's a very weird time in the industry. It seems like the days of being a big blockbuster movies is kind of long gone. We're seeing a lot of movies that would have never gotten greenlit in Hollywood, would never even seen a time of day in a festival. Now we're seeing a lot of people come up with their own ideas, shooting their own projects, and they're getting award nominated. I know one actress from the Bronx. She actually played if I'm not mistaken, she played Supergirl in Justice League, Zack Snyder's Justice League. She was from
Okay.
the Bronx, and she got noticed because of a short film she did that got picked up at a festival. So I think the tides are changing to now. You don't have to just make your name in television, work your way up now. I think now you can do your own work, grow your brand, and eventually someone will see you and find you that way. What do you think about the landscape right now of entertainment? Because it's a better but it's also certain things that definitely needs a little work. What do you think about the landscape so far?
100% correct. The whole thing is changing right now, and the old way of doing things is also changing. I think it's absolutely necessary where you develop your own brand and you have your own vision for what you want to do, because the opportunity is there now. And when you look at, for example, Paramount, just I was reading some of the press releases, and Skydance comes in, takes over, new ownership, boom, they make a deal for the UFC right away. Their big
Right.
concern is not necessarily on movies and stuff like that. It's on live sports. They want that content. They're just not interested in making the investment to necessarily develop, right? That
Right.
opens up a wide opportunity for other filmmakers to get through the cracks. It's all wide open right now. But again, I think we had mentioned this briefly. You do have to pave your way and kind of carve out your niche, because when I saw Christopher Nolan sold out Odyssey a year in advance for the IMAX screenings in 70 millimeter,
Right.
it wasn't, obviously his cast is star studded. I mean, anybody in their right mind would just say, yeah, I'll work for free if I could be in a Christopher Nolan film, right? But when he sold it out, it was Christopher Nolan that sold it out. It wasn't. I don't think any of the actors. I haven't even looked at really the cast that's on it. I know Matt Damon and a few people are on it, but I think he did what a lot of us kind of need to do. He carved out a niche.
Right.
There's an audience now that will pay to see whatever he has. You don't even have to give him a title. It's a Christopher Nolan film. Okay, enough, right? It doesn't even need any names in it because it's a Christopher Nolan film. So essentially, I feel like the landscape is changing where we could do that now, and develop niche audiences and still be very successful at it, right? I think that's a pro if you're somebody like me on my side of the equation where you're constantly producing, developing, creating. But essentially, if you're an actor or whatever, you can say, well, I don't necessarily do that, but you can work in teams with people that are doing that, right? So all of
Right.
a sudden you're co-creating, making things as teams, and I think like a collective almost. So you all kind of move up together, right? You're not like some of the unions, nothing against them, but there's a lot of people there, and sometimes it's hard to filter through just because there's a huge amount of people there.
Right.
But when you can work in these teams that are coming together, all of a sudden, again, opportunities just keep coming, 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 coming. So even if you're not the producer, you're not the writer, you could still work in a team kind of setting, right? And you
Right.
guys just come up together. I feel like our team, a lot of us, that's what we did, right? We've just been working as a team, and we're kind of going through the motions, and we're kind of coming up together. And then there's more people that get added to the team, and then there's other teams over there that you end up collaborating with, and the opportunities are wide open if you keep your mind open to it, right? If you're looking at it the old way, I think things look bleak, right?
Right.
If you're looking at how we used to do it, because you're seeing a lot of a lot of consolidations with the studios. There's mass consolidation right now, and so it looks like things are shrinking. Not as big of an investment anymore as what used to be to develop talent.
Right.
But it's also opening up opportunities on the flip side, right? It opens the way for all the independent guys, and I think that's the future. The Paramounts, they just want you to do it and then come to them and do a deal, right?
Right.
Essentially, that's ultimately where we're going, right? We don't want to get too involved. We got other things we want to focus on, like live sports, our UFC, our $7 billion investment. You go make your $10 million movie and just come to us and make a deal, right? you know, that's essentially where we're going, right?
Right.
But that's cool because it opens up new opportunities, right? So But so I see a lot of pros, and I can see how it might look bleak to some people just because of, if you're thinking the old ways, how we used to do it, it doesn't quite work like that anymore, right? And this day and age, it's so easy to reach out, like you and I are talking, right?
Right.
And as we're going through our projects, I keep trying to I've had this discussion with my wife. I'm like, Percy, it's really easy for him to be an antagonist, I think. But if we had to cast him in something, I think, we got to go in a different direction. How about something nobody would expect, right? Like, something completely out of the ballpark, right? And I think Carly Rose, who was in EFC, when I first met her, that's what I thought too. I'm like, she cannot be the girl next door. Anything she does needs to be messy and like bloody, and she got bloody in EFC, but in Let Go, the next film, she went complete. Um, I'm not even going to compare it to Heath Ledger, but she went to a level, like a dark level, that was so messy. It just like it's up there with some of the best Oscar performances. Um, over the past decade, I think. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
I, I will say, I think when it comes to acting, right? I've thought about this, and I remember not too long ago I was talking to an actor friend about this, where it's like, the days, one of the things, I think I reached out to you to email about this. I got reached out to through a magazine company who asked, interview me, and they said, what are some things people you wish someone would have told you? And up until my professional career, right? I was doing local community, I was doing college stuff, I was doing stuff post college, and I've realized that the days of I could play Othello and then play, the love interest in Macbeth, or playing all types of characters are long gone, because now people look at you through a lens. And one of the things you said was, for me, a lot of people have this connotation of me, right? They see me. I'm a tall guy, crazy, luscious hair. Of course, I got to mention that. But I think some people either look at me as a very cocky individual, or they see me as a very outgoing type of person. And so I've found that throughout the last 8 years, a lot of roles I get tend to be either the bad guy, or there's times where I get the best friend, the life of the party type of roles. But it seems to me the roles that people like to see me in more is like the villain, the a-hole kind of. And it's because for me, I know, when I'm around and about, when I'm talking to people on the podcast, or when people see me in public, I know that I need to be presentable in a way, right? When you look at someone, you want to say, "Oh, he's an actor," or "He looks professional. He knows what he's doing." So I act a certain way. But then people don't see the side of me that grew up in New York in the projects, the more edgy part of me, right? And so that's why, like, I love roles like that, because people don't see me like that often. They might think, okay, he's full of himself, but they don't see that dark, gritty version of me. And I love playing that because it makes people think, really, Percy, that's him. And I think that's what acting is about, right? And I think,
yeah.
shout out to actress in your movie, because I think oftentimes as actors, we and actresses, we want to, of course, it's easy to make a little money doing, no disrespect to The Rock, but The Rock has made his money doing his thing. And I'm in the belief that I don't disagree with his approach, because we live in a society now where you got to get what you can get, and he's
Mm.
found this niche and he's found this lane. So, do I want to do both roles? Of course. But I know most people, when they look at me, especially behind the camera, the casting directors, executives, producers, they're going to look at me in a certain way. So why even try to play the game of, oh, well, maybe I should audition for this, but I'd rather do this when I know that they want me to do this role anyway. It's just, it's a waste of my time, it's a waste of their time. So, that's a long-winded question, answer to what you were saying, but I want to dial it back a little bit, because there's been something happening in the entertainment industry, and I know we was gonna go to we was
Yeah,
gonna do a different way, but
it's
I'm
okay.
gonna save that a little later because I want to get your opinion on something. So I was talking to a friend of mine who's been in acting for over decades, been in Netflix, done a bunch of movies with celebrities and stuff. And one of the things I kind of expressed frustrations on, and I've heard it through agents and managers to a degree, is that a lot of people feel like the industry changes to the point where it's not it's no longer about the hard work, right? It's about your visibility, your social media, and your branding. And the days of you can just put hard work and just audition, and you'll finally get that big break. It's still true to a degree, but what we're seeing now is, and NDAs, I can't really say the projects, you might get them, but there's been a lot of projects I auditioned for in the last year or so where it's like, okay, this would have been, not only it's not for the money, but it would have been nice to work with Denzel. It would have been nice to do this long standing series. And I'm losing the roles to celebrities. And a lot of actors are complaining about that, where it's like, okay, I get it, they got to make money too. But why are these roles that, 10 years ago they would never be doing? Why am I losing these roles to this guy and this woman? Like, that's not fair to the actors. But for me, I understand it's business. They're in it to make money and a profit, and they know if they have a certain name attached to it, you know, it's guaranteed to bring something in. What do you think about that shift where the co-stars, the day players, we're seeing TikTokers and certain celebrities taking those roles from the everyday working actor? Do you think that's a big problem, or is that just certain projects require some more household name value, and so they want to milk it as much they can to make some money?
There's a few ways to answer that, Percy, and I can tell you this as a fact from the producer's seat because obviously we're looking at this every day. Uh, we're in a world now where it's all about the algorithm metrics. Literally, I kid you not. I can even refer you to some companies right now where we're literally sitting here, we're looking at our projects, and we're looking at potential casting. Who do we approach? How do you combine the right balance? First, you got to do it from a financial standpoint. So when we're as producers sitting here putting packages together, we're putting pro formas together. What kind of money can this film make? This is my producer hat on. We literally look at that. Okay, once it's all done and we go through the whole thing, what type of return are we looking? What are we going to make with this movie? You got to have those. You got to have that guide there, right? If you don't think it's going to make money, you're probably not going to pursue that film. And a big part of that is obviously the talent, because the talent obviously sells it. And a lot of that right now is determined by the algorithms and the metrics. We can literally plug in a potential cast and get a fairly accurate projection on what type of return this film is going to make, right?
Right.
Without talking to anybody. That exists right now, and we can talk after, and I can tell you exactly what all the studios are using, what we're using, and that's governed by a lot of the metrics out there, IMDb metrics, and so many other factors, right? So if your name isn't even coming up, right? Um, if it doesn't even know, if the algorithm doesn't even know who you are, it's a challenge, right? Because at the end of the day, keep in mind, if you look at the big studios, they're still looking at financial returns. They rather, everybody wants a great film. I don't think there's anybody out there that says I want a bad movie, right?
Right.
But a lot of them know if you have a certain formula, things are edited a certain way, pacing's done a certain way, you got the right names in there, it could be a decent film and it'll still do well, right? By the time it's all said and done, by the time they've licensed everything out and ran through all the metrics, I'm not even talking about a theatrical release. I'm talking about for the lifespan of the film, right? So one, a lot of talent. I know there's a lot of work that's done for the craft, and I think that's really, 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 really important. And I think that's why we see a lot of UK talent coming over, and the ones over 40 are so well like trained, right? They're so versatile. They can do almost any role. Sometimes they do Americans better than Americans, right? Which is, something to be concerned about. But so you're dealing with that, and I still do believe that cream will rise to the top. So someone that has like that pure raw talent will somehow find their way. But you're competing now with algorithms, pro formas, so if you can't show not just your craft in terms of like value, um, it becomes a little bit challenging because th- they're going to the names for a reason, right? A lot of those big stars you're talking about, they're taking paychecks right now. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, just pay me. I'm gonna take a check. I know my time is coming up in the next 10 years. We're gonna be calling it a day. I'm gonna get as much money as I want right now. And a lot of that group, the ones with the names. We don't have to go into anybody particular, but it's very obvious when you see huge household movie stars, doing stuff, and you're like, why is he in this? That doesn't make sense. And they took paychecks, right? They got
Right.
paid. Okay, well, perfect example. I think Cameron Diaz had retired, and she came back to do a Netflix movie, right,
With
with
Jamie
Jamie
Foxx.
Foxx.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I can imagine the Brinks truck that they rolled up to her home to pull her out to come and do the film, right?
Right.
Why? Established name, it hits a certain demographic. Um, Boom, they know they're gonna drop it. They know it's gonna be, what do you call it? All their minutes. They're gonna accumulate all these minutes. That's gonna look really great for shareholder reports. It's gonna result in more money, and it's just this endless cycle, right? So we're in a new world now, though, where I think we have the opportunity to just build our own, carve out our own piece of it, right? It's not just limited to them. I think it's still being redefined right now, right? But eventually, I think a lot of us could be like a Nolan. Like, he's not the talent in front of the camera. He's the director, which that can, he doesn't need any talent in it, right?
Right.
It's still stacked with talent for the same reasons: algorithm, money, everything you can list. But it's not, I don't believe it limits us at all. I think we just, again, there's an old way of doing things. There's a way they're doing things to make sure, and these guys have to make money too, right?
Right.
Otherwise, they're going to stop. But it does, I believe, open the door for guys like me, guys like you, to just pop through. Nobody's going to really see it coming. There'll be more, right? And it's just going to be kind of a new way of doing things, and there'll be new niche markets, and people will start to seek out something a little bit different, right? And I think there's room for everything. You just have to find your lane, right?
Right. I, you bring up a good point, and like I said, we're going to do something special with this, but I want to continue on this trajectory because the Hollywood Reporter just did a ranking about some of the best wrestlers turned actors. They put Dave Bautista's number one, right? And I remember, there's been a few episodes I've done with other people, but I often have this conversation with other actors off camera about this, where it's like people get mad about Dwayne the Rock Johnson, right? Just for instance, oh, he plays himself all the time, whatever. And I often look at it this way: a lot of the big names, excluding Denzel, Will Smith, a lot of them have a niche that they find. If you want the brolic, charismatic guy who can, kick ass, take names, you get Dwayne the Rock Johnson. If you want a ladies' man who knows how to, chew up the scenery and fight, you get Jason Statham. If you want the funny guy who's going to make everybody laugh, you get Kevin Hart. And that's not exclusive to them per se, but they found what makes them work. And the days of a Denzel, one of my favorite actors. I've been on this trajectory for a long time, Uh, I think those days of a Denzel is long gone, where you can just do all the many different types of roles that you want and still be paid just as much as Dwayne the Rock Johnson, right? And so I think now we're in a shift where, you know, I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but I often say, look, people. I use me as an example. People might say, "Yo, Percy, you putting yourself in a box the way you look," and it's like, okay, well, I'm fine with that because I know when I go into an audition room, okay, if there's five people, five black men in this audition, how do I stand out? Yes, the acting does help you stand out, but what makes you look different? Because, I'm sure you could speak to this as a director. You're looking at different nuances. Yes, the acting is the focal point, but how do you look? How do you carry yourself? How do you dress? How do you enjoy the scene? What do you bring to the scene? And so for me, I found that, look, okay, I'm an actor first, but I'm an entertainer as well. So instead of just focusing on just doing acting stuff, just do a bunch of stuff. So, I'm doing YouTube, I'm doing podcasts, I'm doing this and I'm doing that. And then for me, I'm learning how to diversify myself, opposed to just staying in my lane, if you will, and doing one thing. I'm trying to do everything, not only to grow as an actor, but to grow as a person. And that also helps me, in the audition room. So I think right now there's a frustration with a lot of actors, and maybe you could speak on this, where they feel like the days of the true hard work, going to class, auditioning, and just that luck coming, those are long gone. That the actors and the people who got a social media profile, who's building a brand for themselves, they're getting called out a lot more than they are. Uh, maybe as a director, your approach is different, but you have bosses. You're also your own boss. What do you think about that lens of having a presence and a brand and using that to your advantage?
Well, first of all, I'm going to say this to you, Percy, and I'll put a plea out to you and every actor. I can understand why it's frustrating because you're putting so much work every week, right? Developing just your memorization skills, just perfecting the craft of acting, being there with your scene partner, and just going through and you got to stay sharp because you don't know when the call is coming, right? Or the opportunity strikes. So when that comes, you don't want to be just oh wow, I got to warm up again. You want to be able to just go at the snap of a dime. So there's a lot of consistency and there's a lot of work that goes through it. I know I walked the same steps because I wanted to understand it before I started directing. And I understand why people would be frustrated when all of a sudden you see, I'm not calling her out, but you could, somebody calls Kim Kardashian, hey, I need you in this series, right? Because she's so famous. Okay. Okay, fine. Uh, but but with a lot of those people, they didn't study the craft the way you did, and sometimes it comes across like that. And even people who aren't in the industry, they could pick up. It's they could see it because the talent around them is really good, and there's just something slightly off about maybe their performance. Maybe it's coming off not so real because they were just nervous in that scene or weren't connected, whatever it is. Sometimes you can see it, right? At the end of the day, the director, producer still wants to deliver a really good film for the audience, right? And if the acting is horrible, right, people could completely reject it. And yeah, there's films that can lose lots and lots and lots of money, right? You can get the technical stuff right, but the acting, like if it doesn't deliver or sell, um, even if it's just barely passing that mediocre line, people reject the film, right? So you still need to be able to deliver compelling performances, right? Um, take Gary Oldman. Guy could play any character, right?
Right.
And you can throw him in any film. It's always going to be compelling, right? People won't ever get tired of it. Take a TikTok star and try to put them in a film, and it comes across forced, not real. It feels off because the timing is off. They're not used to that, right?
Right.
Obviously, it's a very different medium than going live on TikTok. So I wouldn't, and ultimately, I still think talent will rise to the top. I just feel like actors just need to take another step, and just look at the business of acting now. Like
Mhm.
you are the CEO of your company, and you've got a brand just like what you're talking about. And I understand why Denzel does a lot of the same roles, because that's what people want to see him in, and they make money, right? Same thing.
Right.
Dwayne Johnson, Jason Statham. I'm sure if you and I were talking to Denzel right now, he'd probably have a lot of other things he'd say I'd like to do in terms of roles and films and whatever. But let's be honest, people want to see him in that revenge dad kind of a role, right?
Right.
uh I that in with that type of intensity, and he can try to do something else. I haven't seen the new film he has out with Spike Lee right now. I just heard people aren't liking it, so I can't comment. I don't know. He can try to do something else, but yeah, you're correct. It's at that point where people want to see that, and that in and of itself is still a huge accomplishment, right? So if it's your bread and butter, you know, what are you gonna do? Um, but for actors, I make the plea: continue the craft, try to just get better and better. You can't lose that, right? It doesn't matter. AI comes in or whatever it's going to be. That'll be another genre of film. But you still, when I look at what we did with EFC, we had some seasoned talent there, and one of our actresses, she actually did win an award for Best Supporting Actress, Stephanie Jones. She was very accomplished theater actor, theater teacher, very accomplished in the theater world. Film, I see her run circles around people, and there are things I saw her do that you can't teach somebody, like, for example, coming from TikTok doing lives in film, right?
Yeah.
I could see her, how she was making the scenes better, how she was reacting to her scene partner, right? Everything she was doing was to uplift kind of like that scene. It's almost like I say, if you remember the analogy of Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, and in ballroom dancing, a lot of times the women can backlead a lot of the guys, right? Without them even knowing that they're backleading the whole sequence, right? The dance sequence. And I saw her doing that, and it was a skill level that was just very, 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 very advanced, right?
Yeah.
And you're not going to walk in off a live stream onto a big set to carry that, um, and think it's going to work, right? I would not get discouraged if I was an actor right now. I would just level up, is what they're saying. Up your game.
Yeah.
Keep doing the
Lock
work.
in.
Yeah, keep doing the work, but you got to take the next step right now and make sure you build your brand, right? Where like algorithms and Grok knows who you are, right?
Yeah.
That it's the world we live in. Like it's and that might be the litmus test. If Grok or Chat GPT or one of these guys, Gemini, whatever it is, if they don't know who you are, that's a problem.
I
That's a
I
problem.
I agree, and I'm grateful you said that because like you said, I ain't Denzel yet, so I'm not portraying myself to be some big time shot type of actor. But I often try to tell people like use social media, post your clips, show people what your skills are. Even if someone, I remember early on, when I transitioned from theater to TV and film acting, I would post, I had a private coach for a couple years, and we would do a lot of scenes like in a hotel in Manhattan or whatever. We're just shooting on a phone, or he'll bring his cameraman. And for me, it was learning the craft, and I would post them on Instagram and Facebook. And sometimes people like, hey, the actor was a little choppy, or it was a little stiff, a little wooden. Maybe you can work on that. And I took pride in that because okay, this is telling me, all right, I'm trying to rush myself to the big stage. I don't want to show up to the big stage and crap the bed because you don't really, sometimes you don't get a second shot. And so I started just doing it often. And now, like, yes, I have a lot of podcast stuff on there, but if you scroll, you'll see acting clips, and I still got some coming along the way for people looking. But I think, for me, I often say use social media because it seems to me, a lot of times when I get auditions, they'll ask for your social media. Do you
Oh
have
yes,
TikTok? Do you have YouTube? Do
yeah.
you have Instagram?
Hmm.
And I don't think people need to necessarily be, you know, this whole trend of, oh, I need to have this amount of followers. I don't think that's what's important. But if people can look at your page and say, "Oh, okay, I can see him. He's dancing, he's acting, he can sing. Oh, he's got some talent." Opposed to people going on your page and you got one picture from 10 years ago. People can't judge you from that. And I think we're just in a different society now. And real quick before we continue on, because there's something else I want to ask you. I remember last year Denzel was at a red carpet, and this TikTok and social media, because I do watch his stuff on Instagram. Amazing guy, really talented. I'll give him this. But he was interviewing Denzel on the red carpet, and he said, "Hey, Denzel, I want to do a movie with you." And Denzel said, "Oh, I've heard about you. Get to work, and I'll see you on set." And I think people missed the point of what he was saying. He wasn't telling him that he wasn't talented. What he was telling him was, you got to progress him, doing content creating to actually being on set. And that was one of the things I learned doing background, working with John Voight. He told me, soak this all in, learn from this. Don't just be sitting around like everybody else lollygagging, eating, catering. Watch what we're doing, watch what I'm doing, and you get to understand how this business works. And I think a lot of people kind of forget that, yes, this is art and this is a profession, but this is a business second. So, I didn't get mad that, ASAP Rocky got my role on highest to lowest, but that's a conversation for another day. I actually did lose it. I actually did lose that role to him. So, I'm a find him. But I, I I think this, like you said, I think we're in a great time, and we're in a time now where there's so many opportunities. Whether it's voiceovers, whether it's streaming, whether it's still going to the movies. There's a lot of things happening. And speaking of a lot of things happening, there was we was chatting off camera a little bit about the direction that we wanted to go, and the reason why I kind of threw it off just a little longer is because I figured we'll make this a two-part. Give people what they want. They want to hear us talk, and you have a lot to say. So before we get into that part, I want to ask you, as a director, as someone who's seen it all, done it all, and even still growing to this day. A lot of people might say to you, I have a bone to pick with you. You're a director. Why am I losing out these roles to these people? Like, what's going on? So, and I'm just making fun, of course, but as a director, what are some things that people don't know? Like, people assume they know what a director does, but they don't know the day-to-day operations, the duties, the things that you have to consider when you're looking at talent. Like, what are some things about being a director people just don't know unless they've been in your position?
There's a few things. So from the director standpoint, of course, I'm sure every director wants to see talent, right? They want to see somebody, as for me specifically, I want to see someone who can breathe life into a role. And I always said I'm a collaborator. I'm not trying to micromanage the actor per se, but I like the actors who can get a grip on the role and breathe life into it, and then we just work together. Let's see what that actually looks like. So you want to see some maturity there. You want to see some comfort in their skin in terms of what they're doing. Obviously you always want to see the professionalism. You want to know that the actor can really deliver this the way you're seeing it, and maybe even take it to another level. Now I sit both producer director. A lot of directors still have to deal with producers, and the producers are looking at it from a business standpoint. All right, this person's great, but there's five other people just like them with the same skill set, the same talent, the same everything. Which one is going to bring more eyeballs to the product, right? Because now you get a little bit of a bonus. You can get the same talent, but the director could say, "Well, I have a feeling, I have an instinct about this particular guy or this woman. There's something I feel here, right?" And the directors or producers may look at it and say, well, everybody here is at the same level, same skill set. They all overperformed in their auditions. This one here, though, the metrics look way better. when we plug them in with the cast, we get a little bit of an edge, right?
Yeah.
This happens, right? So I have to split that up in two. You know, you have the producers looking at it from that standpoint, and the directors looking at it. Who's going to deliver for the scene, right? Can you sell this scene? You know, with this, can you do it, right? And they'll get excited about that kind of unction. And in EFC, we had another actor, Richard Zapiri, and um, one of the actors that he had all his scenes with read that role and said, I know you haven't casted this yet, but I have a recommendation for you. And he had recommended him. I had a 30-second conversation with him on the phone. The minute I heard his voice, I'm like, okay, I know it's him. I haven't even met him yet. Uh, we haven't even anything, but I just had that feeling. I knew, it had to be him. I said, it's okay. All right, no problem. No, we're going to get a hold of your agent. We're going to make it happen. Right. And that was from the director standpoint. Now, coincidentally, my wife, who we also co-produce, was going through a lot of the casting tapes that were coming in, and it was sent. His was sent to us. I had overlooked it. I think she had caught it early on, and that does happen, right? But I spoke to him, had a feeling from a director's hat. I said, "Oh, this is the guy. Like he's got the voice. I could tell right away. Just it didn't even take long. Just had that unction. Boom. I think it's him. Didn't even know what he looked like. Didn't see what he looked like. Just had that feeling and was like, boom. I know it's him, right? And we made it happen. And yeah, he took things to a level that I didn't even think we could get to. With that character, right? So that's me from the director side, right? But so there's so many factors that are going to go into this, and that's why I say ultimately at the end of the day, you still got to get to set and still perform, right? So you got to keep the craft up, but you just have to sidestep and catch up the other stuff, the business of it now, right? The branding part of it, because you're right, it's a whole new world. People are looking at those profiles. They also want to see the type of person they're dealing with, and it's easier now than ever before to kind of get a glimpse into that person's world and maybe what they're about. Obviously, if you look like you're going to be trouble for the production, they're going to stay away, right?
Yeah.
But so there's that side of it too. But ultimately, if you're building a brand and you're doing it right, you're putting forward your best presentation, your best foot, as authentically as you can do it, and it'll come across like that, right?
Yeah.
So from a director standpoint, you're always looking for that, right? That person who they get it, they can back it up. There's a level of confidence. They're set in their ways. That's why I like to also try to do that. I'm always looking at how can we balance it with very mature, experienced talent and maybe even some new people, where you get that balance in there. Everybody kind of learns from everybody
Yeah.
uh, too, right? And most importantly, you're always looking at how can you make this scene great, right? Can this talent come in and really help sell this scene? And are they selfless in the sense that they're not going to try to steal the scene? And for people who aren't in the acting world, they may not make any sense, but they're actually trying to help the scene and do everything they can to make it better, right? Including helping their partner in the scene, right? It's like a dance, I find a lot of the mature and experienced actors understand it is a dance, and they're as good as their partner. So if they need to elevate them, they will, right?
Right.
And vice versa. So I do like to see the selfless actor as well, because you could be great, but if you're trying to steal the scene, it's not going to work. It blows up for everybody, right?
Right.
But if you're sitting there and you really want to elevate everybody around you, and you're trying to make the scene as good as possible, and you're secure in yourself for that, then yeah, you always want to work with talent like that, right?
Yeah.
Always want to work with talent like that. But from a producer side, You got to bring it back to metrics and the numbers. What kind of an edge can you get? It's a competitive landscape. This one can help bring more eyeballs, or all of that stuff that you know happens. Those discussions are happening, but nobody wants to really hear that they're happening, right?
Yeah, I feel like at some point, you, no matter if you're actor, producer, director, if you're going to be in this business, you got to understand it's a business first, and that's why for me, I approach it more as a business now than acting, because I feel like as actors we spend more time chasing the roles than actually doing the roles. And so what do you do in that time? Okay, you figure out how does this business actually work, because I often say there's so many people, whether they're basketball players, actors, rappers, who are very talented, who can probably beat LeBron James in a pickup game tomorrow, but nobody will ever see them because they just, and it's not always the fault of them, but they just don't have the luxury of being in front of the people who can change their life. They don't have the resources to get to that point. And so for me, I always look at it as this is a business first, acting second, or arts second. There's so many moving parts to it. And, now being in a position where I've got the experience of audition for the big movies and the TV shows, you understand, okay, you know, everything is not just about me. There's so many people who has a voice. And, I've been fortunate and unfortunate to hear that, hey, that sometimes people just don't like you, or maybe this actor had a better skill than you did, or whatever the case may be. There's so many people, with a voice and decision making, that sometimes the director, unfortunately, sometimes y'all get the brunt of it, because y'all the closest thing we can find and see. Um, but I do want to ask you, as a director, everybody, you've mentioned Christopher Nolan, James Gunn. We all know these type of directors. They're very known for a style, or a particular way of how they do business. For you, whether actors looking to work for you, or maybe just your style, what kind of director are you? Are you a hands-on? Are you one that if someone botches their lines, or maybe they didn't come and memorize? Are you hands-on? Are you a very direct person? How do you kind of go about your directing style?
I'm definitely a collaborator, and I'm not and very fluid, because I do believe when you're creating, um, the way you're creating films and you're on scene, there's this intangible element that kind of gets birthed into the set, and a lot of that I'm starting to see comes from mistakes, maybe things that weren't planned. Um, and that's why I believe, for example, AI will just be a different genre of movies, because
Yeah,
there are things that actually happen on a film set that are almost intangible, but it almost breathes some life into that picture, and you can feel it when you're
yeah,
watching the film, right? So I do like to collaborate, and sometimes the wrong line ends up being great.
yeah,
That mistake ends up being, wow, that really works. Maybe you see it in post production, right?
mm,
You know what I mean. So
yeah,
you like to leave a lot of room for things to happen, because I just find sometimes when you're too rigid, it's fine, but sometimes it could be stifling. And the worst thing you want when you're doing something as creative as that is to stifle the energy. You want it to flow a little bit, and I find with all these stories, all these movies, they end up at the end of the day taking on their own life. Like they
yeah,
they have their own form. We're almost like just allowing them to pass through into this realm in a way, and once they come in, they just start taking their own form. If you allow it to do that. I mean, I saw that with EFC. I saw that we have a short film we did too, that I saw the same thing happening, was just taking its own form. We were almost just helping to mold and guide it, but essentially it's doing its own. It's like a life. It's almost like a life force, a living thing, and it's just molding itself. So I try to leave as much room for that as possible. And that's why I often refer to myself as a collaborator. I want to hear what everybody's thinking. People have ideas. Sometimes they're great ones, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they don't see the big picture, so that they don't, yeah, so their idea doesn't work because they're not seeing the whole thing. But that's fine. I let them express it because it could be a really, really good idea that fits into, the whole thing, right? So that's me personally, and when it comes with actors, because you're an actor, we're talking here. I very listen. The amount of work, and this is the thing. I think actors are certainly underappreciated, in my opinion, in this day and age, because the level of work that actors put in, all of that training, all of that focus, everything that you're doing, it's like you train for this moment. So this is your moment right now.
You're right.
All that work you've been doing, this is it. Y- you know I don't want to stifle that energy so much. I want, I want to nurture it more, right? Not stifle. And a lot of times you'd be amazed, well, not you, but maybe other people might be quite amazed at what kind of happens. And if it needs correction, it's fine, we do it, it's not a problem. Because on a director side, you see the vision, you know what it's supposed to be, you know where it needs to go, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
But in that setting, as you've been on these sets, everybody has ideas, everybody has opinions, right? Literally, like hard pressed not to find ideas and opinions. Love hearing them. Don't have to take all of them. Some of them are going to be really good,
Right.
but you work with that, right? You just work with it. So from my standpoint, I find you can create and co-create with people like that, and the energy becomes, it's different, right? It just has a different feel, and then you can feel it in the after result of the film, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes the other way, you could have a perfect film, everything done right, and you're missing that part of it, that whatever that intangible thing is, and it was a good forgettable film that just doesn't really live with you long term, right?
Yeah. That's a good point. And as actors, I for me, I've been doing this for 15 years professionally, 8 years. And I've worked with a lot of directors who were, very professional, very hands-on, very respectful, and treated everybody with respect. But I've had the odd ones that thought they were Quentin Tarantino, but they were the Dollar Tree version. And like for me, like I would never disrespect anybody, whether they're successful or making their way up to that point. But I think this is something for me, and this goes for actors, directors, anything. You know, when I work, I treat it as a profession. That's how I was taught, from my teachers, people who worked on Broadway and TV when I was in, high school. You know, I learned how to be a professional actor, and I think just because you're a director don't give you the right to treat anybody a certain way. And, I know when you get to a certain point in this industry, you're not going to tell Quentin Tarantino how to run his set, So I'm not speaking about him because I never really heard anything about him. But it's usually the lower level ones that I've run into, like unorganized. They blame you for everything. They treat you like crap, and they make it a hard experience to enjoy. But one of the things I've kind of learned is you're going to have to learn how to, like you said, be fluid, because you're going to have a director who's going to want you to memorize and prepare when you get on that set. And everybody's going to make mistakes, but they're not trying to hear, oh, I forgot to memorize this line. You know that. All right, I'm going to get the next actor. Or you might get a director who maybe they did some script changes, and I know this happens all the time, TV and film. They did some script changes overnight. You show up to say, oh, actually, we want you to do these lines, and that happened to me before. And it's a little nerve wracking, but you know what? These are all learning experience for when you get, like you said, to the big time. You know, for me, I always a vision, and it's weird, but everything I do, whether it's a commercial, voiceover, especially TV and film, I often think, okay, if I was Denzel, how would I approach this? I know people think I'm glazing the guy, but I love this guy, and the reason why I do is because his professionalism, the way how he does it, that for me, that's what I aspire to be. So I look at everything as okay, how do I bring the best foot forward to this? And that's what people want to work. Like someone like you want to work with somebody who's going to bring the best foot forward, not I got the role and the hard work stops there, because they got the role. And I think we could talk about this forever. There's a lot of nuances that go into it, but you know, I think it's time. I've been teasing. Why is there something different going on? For this last part, I'm gonna take the hat off. I'm gonna take the host hat off. I'm gonna give it to you. I'm gonna take a step back, and I know there's some questions you wanted to ask me, so I'm gonna shut up. I'm not the Prince of Fresh Air right now. I am Percy, and I'll let you ask your questions.
Well, Percy, I think we started on a theme. Maybe we should kind of keep going a little bit. I do like how you said you're taking little snippets of your acting and you're kind of putting it out there because you're correct. And part of the reason why I said, oh, an antagonist role would be easy for you, just because you got the different look. It's very unique, but I feel like you would have fun with it. You
Yeah,
would just like, I could see you're the type that would have a lot of fun playing an antagonist role. That's why I said I think that's like really easy for you, right? Now, a lot of, for example, casting directors. So you're going to have a director. A production hires a casting director, and a casting director is trying to find a role. So they're filtering through so many people, narrowing it down to bring it to a director. So obviously, the director doesn't even see a lot of these audition tapes until it gets narrowed down to the people the casting director feels is suitable and lines up with basically the vision of the director, right?
yeah,
Okay, fine. So the casting director is going to look, but they may not have the vision for maybe seeing you as something else, right? So like for example, when we come across talent, I'll go on our IMDb Pro account and I'll track the talent and I'll put potential either this type of a role or maybe this person in whatever film that we have coming up in the slate, right? So always
right.
keep an eye out, always tracking, just earmarking stuff like that. So now when the casting director takes your stuff to a director, they may not necessarily see you in maybe a scientist role,
Right.
or a mathematician type of a role, or or like they may not quite see that. So when you're putting little snippets out there, I think it's a good strategy because they can get different looks, a little peek. They'll
Yeah.
see something. Oh, well, I never considered that one before. Maybe I'll keep him in mind for something else that comes down the road, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like that's really cool. But now uh, I'm saying all that because is there like a role that you've always envisioned yourself doing? So maybe we've seen the role already in a film. Maybe it hasn't been done already, or maybe this is just something you've always seen yourself doing, and just the opportunity hasn't presented itself yet. So I'm asking you that. We may have a lot of directors, casting directors, producers, people listening to this right now. And you're probably going to tell them something maybe they didn't know or couldn't see before, but now they're going to see it, you know? So is there
Yeah.
something like that?